Hey,
as the Gemara called it before, Hilchos Mashiach. But nevertheless, okay, today's Gemara is a little bit, actually, the last few days was not so simple. So we're up to the Samach Tesno and Aleph. We are up to about 6 lines on top of the page. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Basically, the last thing, just to tell you what we're up to, the last thing we learned was in the Mishnah that when it comes to a bird carbon, you have to do malika. Malika is when the Kohen uses his thumbnail and he goes from the back, breaks the bone, and that's a substitute for shchitur. That's the method of being matir a bird is through malika. If it's an oila bird, it gets totally burnt on the mizbeach. If it's a chatas bird, it gets totally consumed by a kohen. And we also learned that if you did a malika, which was in a way ineffective, it would not permit you to eat the bird. For example, you use your left hand or you did it at night. Nevertheless, it removes the tumor from the bird because a bird is unique. A kosher bird is unique that if the bird died, it's an avela, you don't become tummy by touching it or by lifting it. You become tummy only by consuming it. Also interesting is that a non-kosher bird does not generate any tumor whatsoever. Does not generate any tumor. So we also learned that if you did malika on if you did shchita on an ordinary bird inside the base of Mikdash, or you did shchita on a kochim bird outside of the base of Mikdash, it was effective to the extent you cannot eat it, but it was effective to the extent that it removes the tumor from this bird. However, if you did malika on a bird, on a normal bird, it's as if you achieved nothing, and it will still generate a tumor. It's just like a carcass. Even though you malika, it's not shchita, it's nothing. Okay, that's what we learned before, and we also learned the same thing applies if you did malika to a kachim bird, but outside of the base of Mikdash. Again, it's ineffective, and the bird is still metame. Okay, those are the rules that we learned. Now we're up to the Gemara here. And we actually had this kind of an expression a few times in Zevachim, because I guess it tells us it's not so easy. Shemaiti, I heard two things, because we learned yesterday an argument between Rav and Rabbi Yechanan that, if you did the left hand, if you did it at night, we say that it at least removes the tumor. What about if a Yisrael does the malika? Malika is something that should be only done by a kohen. If Yisrael did the malika, did he achieve anything? Does it eliminate the tumor or not? So the Rav clearly said it does not achieve anything, does not remove the tumor. And Rabbi Yechanan says it does, because by a bummer, you don't need a kohen, Yisrael can do it, so there's a precedent. So the same thing is by a malika, times the base of English, even though it should be done by a kohen. If Yisrael did it, it proves effective to the extent that it eliminates the tumor. So now Rabbi Yechanan comes along and makes a distinction between kmitza and malika. Kmitza is an activity that you do for flower offerings. Only a kohen can take the 3 fingers, which you're going to learn next Masechta Menachos how it's done. Different kinds of menachos. Take the 3 fingers and makes the scoops out and puts it on the mizbeach. Only a kohen can do that. And so too, when it comes to the bird malika, only a kohen can do that. When it comes to an animal shchita, anyone can do the shchita. But when it comes to malika and kmitza, has to be done by a kohen. And we learned before. Just discussed the machlekes Rabbi Shmuel if it removes the tumor or not. So comes along Rabbi Yitzchak and says there's a difference between kmitza that should be done by a kohen and if Yisrael did it, or malika it should be done by a kohen and if Yisrael did it. So I'm Rabbi Yitzchak. Shemaiti, I heard shtayim. I heard 2 things. Achas, I heard regarding kmitza zar. I heard regarding if a Yisrael does kmitza, and achas I heard also regarding malika zar, if a Yisrael does the malika. One of them I heard, achas, one I heard tated, that even if you place it on the mizbeach, you have to remove it because you did nothing, you didn't achieve anything at all with your either kmitza or malika, and you have to remove the mizbeach. And achas, and one of them light tated, you achieved something by doing whatever activity it was, and you leave it on the mizbeach. The problem is, I can't remember which is which. So we had that expression a few times already in Zevachim. Amar Chizkiah said, Mistabra, it makes more sense to say that kmitza, if a Yisrael does the kmitza tated, you achieve nothing, remove it from the Mizbech. However, Malika, for Yisrael did Malika, loy tated. You don't have to remove it from the Mizbech. So Gemara wants to know, why should there be a difference between the two? Now, we said before, Rabbi Yechanan's logic, why he says, if a Yisrael does Malika, we say, leave it on the Mizbech, we say that the Tumah gets removed. He said because there's a precedent. That's what was by a bama in the time when there was no Mishkan, those few years, those short windows where you had bamas, you didn't require a Kohen to do it. Even Israel could do it. And the question, however, is, in the times of the bamas, did they only bring animals or did they also bring bird offerings, flower offerings? Now, why there should be an issue at all is because where we learned the concept of bamas before they built the Mizbeach by the Matan Torah by Har Sinai. It says in the pasuk that they went ahead and they brought kabbanas. It says, Vayalu oilis, and they brought Zevachim and Shlamim. They only brought animals. Now the question is that taken literally that only animals can be used for a bama because there's no Mizbeach then? Or it just happens to be that's what they did, but really you can use birds, you can use flower offering. So therefore there was a precedent. Says the Gemara, and you don't have to be a Kohen. Says the Gemara, Mr. It makes more sense. What's the difference, Malika? I don't understand. Why should Malika be acceptable? The yeshna b'mama, because there's a precedent in the times of the bamas. No, kmitza nama yeshna b'mama. Kmitza also in the times of the bamas. They anybody can do it. If you can tell me, ain't mincha b'bama, they did not bring up flower offerings in the times of the bama. If you hold that view, then neither ain't oifus nami b'bama. Then you also hold the view there were no birds in the times of the bama because they are interlinked. The Amar Rav Sheisha said, the one who said yesh mincha b'bama, that they brought a mincha in the times of the bamas, then yesh oifus b'bama. There's also they brought birds. And the mincha, and the one who said there was no mincha brought, then ain't oifus, no birds either. So what's going on here? So my timer, and what's the reason? Because it says in the pasuk Zevachim, they brought animals, v'loy menachas, and we say animals, but not, karbanas, but not flower offerings, v'loy oifus, and not birds. So why are you telling me that kmitza in a way is stricter than Malika? Says the Gemara, I'll tell you why. Definitely there was a precedent time of the bama, so therefore Malika by Yisrael, if it was done, it achieves that it takes away the tumah, it achieves that if you put on the Mizbech, you leave it there. So why should mincha be different? I'll tell you why. Because the mincha, the way it was done in the times of the bama, was different than the way it was done in the Beis Hamikdash. And because the way it was done in the Beis Hamikdash there was no precedent for that. Therefore, we say that you achieve nothing if a Yisrael does it. What is the difference? In the times of the bama, they did flower offering. They took a flower offering, put it directly on the Mizbech. In the times of the Beis Hamikdash, first they put it into a special vessel, a clay sharis, and from there they brought it to the Mizbech. So if a Yisrael did it, there is no precedent where you put it into clay sharis that Yisrael can then take over and do the kmitza. And that's why we're stricter with the kmitza. So they did not use the clay sharis by the bamas, and that's why by mincha there's no precedent for it. Then the Mishnah continues. Molak b'smoil b'layla. If you did malika at the left hand or at night, at least you remove the tumah. So now we bring an interesting brisa. There's different ways of learning the brisa. We're going to learn the way what's written here in the Gemara on the side looks like Rashi. It's actually, we're not sure who wrote it, so we call it the Mefarish. And they found the manuscript of Rashi on the bottom, as you see in some of the Gemaras, you have it on the bottom, on the right side there. But the Rashi learns the Gemara a little bit differently, but we'll learn the Gemara like the Mefarish learns the Gemara. So this is the Mefarish learns the Gemara that when they say over here that a bird, if it's an avela, and you ate a kosher bird, but it was never slaughtered properly, so it just died like a carcass. If you eat it, if you touch it, nothing happened. If you eat it, you become tummy. Now, if you shecht it, obviously it no longer becomes tummy. And malika does the same thing. You no longer become tummy. So the question is, there are two kinds of birds. One is an oila sa'if and one is a chata sa'if. A chata sa'if, when you do malika, the kohen eats it. So the malika is like shchita. It's matir the bird. But when it comes to an oila bird, it just goes to the mizbeach. Nobody eats it. So the malika, it really didn't do anything. So the question is, if somebody took an oila bird and ate it, is there still tumah in that bird or not? because even though it's the kosher bird and everything else, and you did the right activity, you did malika, but because the malika didn't achieve anything, because nobody can eat from it, so maybe it's treated like an avela in that regard, and it still generates tumah. That's the Gemara's question. Rashi learns that it's talking about where somebody puzzle, did malika, but it was the left hand or something. But let's look more like Mafash. I've learned, I would have thought, to hey malika, that if you, even though you did malika, shehi lifnim, and you did it inside the base of you did everything correctly, but we're talking about an oila bird, mitame begodi basically, if somebody ate it, it'd still become tame, even though you did malika. Why? Because it's like an avela. Nobody can eat it. So what did you achieve? Sounds like it was never slaughtered. Therefore, it says the pasuk nevela, only an avela, a carcass, is considered it generates tumah. Says the Gemara, but hanami neveli. This, even though you did malika, it's like an avela because nobody's going to eat it. So the malika didn't really achieve anything. Elo tamaleimas, you're right. In that pasuk where it talks about the bird, it says in the pasuk that anybody who eats an avela utrefa, and then you become tummy and you have to wash your clothes. Now we know it's talking about a bird because if it's talking about an animal, you become tummy by touching it, not by eating it. Since the Torah says you become tummy by eating it, it can only be talking about a bird. And it says two examples, nevela or a treifa. What do you have to add treifa? So we're going to learn like this, that you know what's coming to a treifa? Ma treifa. She'ein materes is iser. When something is treif, the treif doesn't make it any more permitted than it was before you became treif. Af kol she'ein materes is iser. So too, when do we say that the bird will generate tumah? If you did not do something to the bird that in any way lightens the iser. Yotza malika, but in the case of malika, even though it's an oila bird, so the kohen can't eat it, but what do you do with another bird? You place it on the mizbech. Remember in the past, we referred to the mizbech as if the mizbech is eating it. There's achillas adam, achillas mizbech. So therefore, the malika did achieve something. At least now the mizbech gets it. But prior to your malika, that you don't put it on the mizbech. You have to take it off. So now that you did malika, it stays on the mizbech. So your malika did achieve something, and that's why it's no longer tamei. Is yatsa malika shilifnim, that's inside. Hoil yimateres is isa. It removes the isa, at least as far as the mizbech is concerned. Ein metame begodin, basically. Therefore, it's not metame begodin. You learn the word treifa. What happens if hevi hamoilik? Let's bring the case of somebody did malika on a bird, kachim. It was a bird, a sacred bird, but bechutz. You did it outside the base of midrash. You did the malika, but outside the base of midrash. And we learned before, you did malika outside the base of midrash, you did nothing. It's not even considered like a shchita because malika is not shchita. Malika shchita is you take a knife and you cut right through. Malika is you press with your fingers, pressing, it's breaking the neck. Totally different activity. Not just the implement you're using, but just a totally different activity. And therefore, if you did it outside the base of Mikdash, so it's a special, there's a cost of that only in the base of Mikdash. The moment you do it outside the base of Mikdash, you did nothing. Therefore, the bird still generates tumah. Or if you did malika on chulin, ordinary birds, even on the outside, you did a kosher bird, and you went ahead and malika. It's still, if you ate it, you become tamei. Because the malika on a bird is nothing, only if it's kachim inside the base of English. Since it does not in any way alleviate the iser or mitigate the iser, therefore a person will become tamei. That's brisa number one. Brisa number two. Tani idach, we'll learn another brisa. Yochel, I would have thought. So that's talking about malika. Now we're going to talk about shchita. Now shchita generally is the correct process to use to be matter an ordinary bird. So now we're going to learn about two different scenarios. One is you took an ordinary bird and you did shchita, but in the wrong place. You did it inside the base of Mikdash. The problem is inside the base of Mikdash, we don't normally do shchita on a bird. We do malika. You did shchita. Did you achieve anything? Did you remove the tumah if you ate it? Or you did shchita on a kachim bird. I don't care if it's inside the base of Mikdash, outside, but you took a kachim bird that requires malika and you did shchita. So do we view the shchita as you achieved something or not? So the Gemara says as follows. And we already said before that you achieved nothing. Now we explain how we know that. We explained before that shchita does do something, and therefore it removes the tumah. How do we know that? I would have thought, hey, shchitas cholun lifnim. I would have thought if he shechted an ordinary bird inside the base of English, or kachim baby him inside or outside, mitama basically, he didn't do anything. He did the wrong thing, so therefore it still generates tumah. Tamalema. Therefore, the pasuk says, what kind of bird should you not eat? A nevela. Only if it's an nevela, if it's a carcass. And here you shechted it. Says you can't eat this bird. It's like a nevela because the shchita on a kachim bird achieves nothing, or shchita on a regular bird inside the base of Mikdash is nothing. So therefore, we learn from the next word. We'll use the same word that the previous brisa used regarding malika. Now we're going to use it for shchita. El tamalei treifa. And how are we going to learn from the word treifa? What does that tell us? What do we know about treifa? Treifa is a uniform law. I don't care where the bird is. If it's treif, it's treif. So therefore, we're going to say, when do we say that it generates tumah? That wherever it was done, it'll be the same outcome. But if, let's say, in one place the law will be one way, and in another place the law will be another way, then it no longer falls under the category of an avela and treifa. It's no longer like a treifa, and therefore there's no longer any tumah. So explaining this. It says treifa, and we're going to compare an avela to treifa. Ma treifa, shavin v'chuz. I don't care where it is. Inside, outside the base of Midrash, treif is treif. Is av kol shavas b'mechutz. Same thing. Whatever activity you're doing, it's only a problem. It only leaves the tumah there if it's the same outcome, whether it's in the base of Midrash or not. Yotza shchitas chulin, shechting chulin b'fnim. Had you done that outside the base of Midrash, it would have been a kosher bird. It's only a problem inside. So therefore, it's no longer compared. That kind of avela is no longer compared to treifa, and therefore it no longer is tamei if you ate it. Or the same thing by the same token, kachim. Kachim, whether it's inside or outside. Now the Gemara will explain later why should there be a difference inside or outside, but there's a difference, and because there's a difference, we'll say, you know what? It's no longer like a treifa. You no longer generate tumah. The inside is similar to the outside. You no longer become tummy if you swallow it. Says Gemara, let's understand that part. I understand chulin that the inside is not like the outside. The outside is kosher, and therefore the law of inside is different outside and doesn't fall anymore on the word treif in the pasuk, and therefore it does not generate tumah beis habliyah. But when it comes to kachim, if you did shchita on a bird of kodesh, I don't care where you did it. Whether inside the base of Mikdash, outside, it's possible. So it's the same thing. So the din should be that it should remain tameh if you ate it. Amarav is a difference. If you go ahead and you shecht a bird, if you go ahead and you shecht a bird of carbon, a carbon bird outside the base of Mikdash, you're chayiv for shchutin chutz. You shechted something outside the base of Mikdash, even though the normal requirement is malika. But if you shechted, we live from a pasuk, you shechted outside the base of Mikdash, you're chayiv. It says oy asher yishchet comes to teach you that even if you just shechted it, the wrong activity, but outside the base of Mikdash, you're chayiv chorus. So if you shecht the bird outside the base of Mikdash, if you shecht the bird outside, you get chorus. If you shecht the bird inside the base of Mikdash, it's the wrong activity, did an avera, but you don't get chorus. So there's a difference between the outside and the inside. And therefore, it's no longer like a treifa where it's uniform, everywhere it's the same. And that's why it's no longer generates tumah. If, let's say, outside, the shchita did achieve something, that it gives chorus for doing what you did. So, so therefore, since the shchita you did outside achieved something, so it also achieved, it's no longer just an avela just sitting there, died on its own. You did something. And therefore, it no longer generates tumah, at least as far as we know, is outside. Nu ashker chutz, all we know that is about outside. Pniminal, what about inside the base of Mikdash? If you shechted the bird, how do you know you don't that it removes the tumah? So this is what the Brisa says. Since it's not the same, therefore we say that it's no longer like an avela in the pasuk, like a treif in the pasuk, and therefore it does not generate tumah. If you did malika on kachim on the outside, we said before, if you did malika on kachim on the outside, you did nothing, and therefore the tumah still remains. But if you did malika, well, that's a simple question. But if you did malika on the kachim on the inside, it's the right thing, and obviously it's 100% kosher, and there's no tumah. So it's not the same inside or outside. You just said, well, if it's not the same inside and outside, it's no longer fits into the pasuk and no longer generates tumah. So how come if you did malika on kochim outside the base of English, we say that the tumah is still there because you did nothing. So the malak kochim if he went ahead and did malika on a bird outside the base of English, namilai also it should not generate tumah because it's not the same as inside. It's not the same. Outside you did malika, it's no good. Inside you did malika, it's perfect. So it's not the same. So it's no longer part of the pasuk. You should not generate tumah. What are you talking about? When do we say that it has to be the same everywhere? There's a problem with both, but the severity is not the same. But if one of them is a problem, one of them, that's the method of doing it. So what do you tell me it's not the same? Of course not the same. The Torah said this is what I want to done inside the base of English. So therefore, but outside is different, and therefore outside you still generate tumah. You can't say, oh, but inside it doesn't generate, because this is the way you're supposed to do it inside. That's not what we're talking about. Two things which are no good. And for example, a bird of Kodesh. It's no good inside, no good outside. But outside is different because you'll get chorus. Okay, so we say it's not the same level of Isur. It's not included in the pasuk. But here, it's not a question of Isur. That inside you're supposed to do Malika. So if you did Malika outside, you achieve nothing and still coming. They ain't done so that's what, it's not a question. No, but Tanya, we learned yesterday, if you took the carbon animal or bird outside the base of English after you finish the whole process of sprinkling the blood and everything else, and then you bring it back in, and we said if you put it on the Mizbeach, leave it there. Why? Because there's a precedent at the time of the Bombas, there were no real rules of where it has to be. There were no confined spaces. You can bring it anywhere in Eretz. But that, how can you learn from Bamba? By Bamba, that's the mitzvah. Make a Bamba in your backyard. So what do you tell me that the base of Migdash, when you have restrictions, let's learn from Bamba. But there are no restrictions. You just said you cannot learn an Isa from somewhere where there's no Isa at all. But once you put it in the Bech, bring it down. So because there's a priest in the Bamba. But you just said we can't learn something which is also for something which is, that's the way it's meant to be done. So you're right. We don't really learn from Bamba. You know how we know that once you put it on the Mizbeach, you leave it there? We learned from a pasuk. We learned that Yaitse, once you put it on the Mizbeach, leave it there. You brought it back into the base of Mikdash, leave it there. How do we know? It says in the pasuk, Zois Toidas ha'oila. These are the rules of oila, and you put it on the Mizbeach, you put it on the Mizbeach. So we learn from there by an oila, even though it's possible, once it's on the Mizbeach, leave it there. And it says Toidas, as if all the kabbanas are compared to it. This is a general rule. On the other hand, it says Zeis. It's only in this case. So we learned. Like all the activities up to the matter, including the sprinkling the blood, it's limited only to an oila. If you put that on the Mizbeach, leave it there, even though it shouldn't be if you didn't do all the right activities. But once you go beyond sprinkling the blood, then we say it's Taidas, all animals are the same, all birds are the same. Once you put it on, you don't take it off. Up to the next Mishnah. So now what happens? You did Malika, everything is right. Turned out to be that the bird was treif. But you did Malika. Do we say now the tumah sort of dissipated, vanished, or do we say, look, your Malika didn't really achieve anything because the bird is treif, so therefore the bird is still tummy. So we're going to find there's an argument from Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rashi, this argument is not only limited to Malika. According to Rashi, the same argument is you shecht an animal, right? We know by an animal, if it's an avela, you touch it, you become tummy. If you shecht it, there's no tumah. What happened? You shecht an animal, it turns out to be treif. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it will say that your shchita didn't achieve anything, it's still tameh. According to the mayor, you did the shchita, and therefore the tumah is gone. So the mayor holds by shchita tumah is gone, shchita of a bird tumah is gone, even though it turned out to be treif, and the same thing by malika. Rabbi Yehuda argues in all cases. Says the Mishnah. Well, like he did malika when it's treif, but it turned out to be that it was treif. The mayor says, "Eina metame beisabilia." It's no longer metame when you eat it because you took away the tumah. And Rabbi Yehuda says, "Metame." Since your shchita didn't achieve, your malika didn't achieve anything, it's still tamei. I'll prove it to you. Kal v'chomer. Now remember, Rameir, according to Rashi, Rameir's kal v'chomer only works according to him. The premise. What's going to be the premise? The premise is going to be by an animal. If you shecht it turned out to be treif, it's not tamei. That's surely by a bird the same thing. Now why is it kal v'chomer? Because an animal is much stricter than tumah. You just touch it, you become tamei. By a bird, you don't become tamei unless you swallow it. So if you shechted a bird, from a kalochemi, you shechted a bird and turn it to be treif, it's not tummy, says the Gemara. Amar Meir, says the Mishnah, kalochemi, even the veil of behema shouldn't be tummy bagamasa behema, on the veil of a behema. That touch, you just touch, you become tummy, you're lifting it. Yet shchitasa mitaheres, treifasa mitumasa, if you shecht it and turned out to be treif, it's still no longer tummy. So nevela, when it comes to a bird, she'ena metame b'magamas, you touch it, don't come tummy. Only when you eat it. So surely for shechted, eina din shetei shchitasi mitahares treifasi tumosa. Surely for shechted, it's no longer tummy. And once we've established by a bird, shchita removes the tumah, even though it's treif, then we're going to go one step further and say the same thing should apply to malika. Because if malika is similar to shchita, malika is on kachim birds, shchita is on ordinary birds. Is mamatina, what do we find? We find when you shech that she machsharta lachila. What does shchita achieve? That now you're able to eat it. Umetahara is treifasa betumasa, and therefore, even though it's treif, in a case with treif, it removes the tumah. Is af malikasa. The same thing should apply to malika. She machsharta ba'achila. It enables the kohen to eat, let's say a karmachatas bird, you can eat it. Is tita treifasa betumasa. If it became treif, it should take away the tumah. That's the view of Rameir. Rabbi Yossi has a third opinion. He said there's a difference between a bird shechting and a bird malika. And why? We have a rule, dayay lava min hadin liyas kanam. The rule is that when you have a kavach and you have a premise, the thing that you're trying to learn or derive from the kavach can never be stricter in outcome than the original premise. Even though in logic it should be stricter, but you don't go beyond the original kal. Whatever the rule by the kal will apply to the chaymer, to the stricter one, but no more than that. So all we know from the kal is shchita. So we know by the all we know by the chaymer is kal chaymer. All we know the kal is shchita. So surely the chaymer, we say the shchita works. In other words, if an animal shchita takes away the treif, even though it's treif, eliminates a tumah, so too by a bird. But then you want to go a step further, malika. By an animal, we don't have that. So how can you go further than that? That's the view of Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Yossi says, Daya can avail behema that what? Only shchita does the job, not the malika. Says the Gemara, so this rule of Daya is a rule that everybody agrees with except Rav Tarfon. So, and Rameir doesn't agree with the Chachamim. Rameir loy dorish Daya. In fact, what Daya deraisi, we learn Daya from the Torah. The time we learned what's the story of Kavachayim? It says when Miriam became a tzaras, a leper, for insulting Moshe Rabbeinu and so on, for the Shechina talking to Moshe. So Hashem said to Moshe, and Moshe was davening, please forgive her. Hashem said to Moshe, if her father Yoda would have spat in the face, she should have been banished for 7 days. So Kavachayim l'Shechina. So surely, when it comes to the Eibishter, surely she should be banished for longer, even 14 days. I mean, it's much worse. Ella, Daya, love, and I won't go any more than what her father, another 7 days, and that's it. So what's the logic of Rameir? How does he then leap from a shchita of a bird to malika? I'm going to be you're right. It's not the Kavachayim. Even though Mishnah mentioned Kavachayim, he's just talking to Rabbi Yehuda, but really it's a pasuk. Now, what pasuk does he learn it from? He found the pasuk in the Dash. It says in the pasuk regarding an animal. It says the following. It says in Parsha Shmini we have all these laws of kasha and tmeya and tuma. Zois toidas habehema v'oiv. These are the laws of behema and a bird and anything that crawls on the ground, and the laws of tuma. Now we are equating, making a hekashe between a bird and an animal. What are we learning from an animal to a bird, or what are we learning from a bird to an animal? In fact, they're very different. Which way are they similar? Behema, first of all, behema only generates tumah if you touch it or lift it. A bird does not become tummy by touching it. On the other hand, only when you eat it. On the other hand, oif has a strictness over an animal, and that is when you eat the bird, not only you become tummy, but your clothes become tummy. Oif metame begodim abeisablia. Oif metame begodim if you touch it, if your clothes as well, but just by eating. Behema ain't a metame beisablia. A behema does not become tummy if somebody pushes. If somebody puts it on the tip of a stick, a kazayis, let's say, of nevela, and sticks it down your throat. It's not metame at all. It's not metame at all. And by a bird, not only you become tummy, but your clothes become tummy. I'll tell you. So what's the comparison to an animal and bird? Ma behema davar shemachshira, just like by behema, that the activity that makes it kosher, which is shchita, la'achila, is metayhe treifasim tumasa. At the same time, if it turns out to be a treifa, it eliminates the tumah because it's not an avela. So af oif. So too, when it comes to a bird, that which enables you to eat it. I don't care whether it's shchita by an ordinary bird. I don't care whether it's malika by a kachim bird. Is metaya trefasim tumasim. Is metaya the trefa from his tumah. That's where Rameh learns it from. Okay, says the Gemara Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda argues and he says that the malika achieves nothing. How does he know? How does he know? The Vela is it died on its own. This isn't a Vela. You shechted it properly. It turned out to be treif. How do you know that it still generates tumah base, I believe? Says the Gemara, that very pasuk where it talks about the tumah of the bird, there's one word that's superfluous, and that word seems to indicate to us that if it turned out to be treif, and that's as follows. My time, Akra Ashkadona, she found the pasuk. Interesting expression, he found the pasuk. When he found it, you learned the Torah, you know the pasuk. And we find it all the time. They found the pasuk. Anyway, he found the pasuk and he darshened. It says in the pasuk by the bird, as we said before, it's talking about a bird because it says if you eat it, you become tummy. Obviously, it's talking about a bird. And it says there, nevela utreifa. If you ate from a nevela and a treifa. Now, there's an argument we're going to have whether a treifa, do we say a treifa is alive, or do we say that halachically a treifa is ein lechayim? Since we only have 12 months to live, a treifa is as if it's already a dead bird walking. So they say, he says, regardless, whichever it is, why does the Torah have to include treifa? If the Torah would told a bird that's an avela, a kosher bird that's an avela, generates tumah, what does it add by saying treifa? If you learn that a treifa is considered a living bird, okay, but then when it dies, it becomes an avela. And if you learn that a treifa, is a dead bird walking, then it's even worse than an avela. It was an avela while it was alive. According to what Tosfos understands Rashi, that means that even you touch if you touch something like that, or if you would eat it somehow, or in theory, it generates tumah even when it's alive. It's a dead animal, a dead bird. So why does it have to add treifa? What's it adding with the word treifa? Unless Rabbi Yehuda says treifa is a different case. Treifa is where you shechted it. The veil is it died on its own. Treifa is you shechted it, but it turned out to be treif. It still generates tumah. That's what Rabbi Yehuda wants to say. What do you tell treifa? If you feel that treifa is considered a living thing, and until it dies, it's alive, and then became an avela. No, avela muda. It says right in if it died, it's an avela. No, boss. Im treifa ain't lechai. You tell me treifa is not considered a living thing. How do you become an avela? Then it was an avela already before an avela. No, but it's even stricter than an avela. You know what means treifa? Not that it died on its own. Treifa sheshachta. Then you shecht it. Shemitam, it still generates tumah. Rav Shizbi says, let me ask you a question. By animals, we also find, it says by an animal, that the fats of an avela, or the fats of a treifa, the fats part of it does not generate tumah. You're not allowed to eat the fats, obviously, you're not allowed to eat animals alive, but the fats, the behemoth, the flesh of the animal will generate tumah, if it's an avela. But the chaylev of the avela does not pass on any tumah. But it says also chaylev treifa. Now, following Rabbi Yehuda's logic, it would sound like that you would have to say the same thing. That it's talking about you shechted the animal still remains tameh, but if it turned out to be treif, but the fats is tar, which is odd because we're going to learn like Rab Meir, and that everyone says that if you shechted an animal and it turns out to be treif, it's no longer metam, it's not an avela. So how is Rabbi Yehuda going to learn the word treifa by an animal, by chaylev of an animal, which is extra? How is he going to learn it? If he has the same approach that he has by a bird, that's so much chita, how are you going to learn when it comes to an animal? Says the Gemara. Following your logic, name us say the following, same logic. What do I need chaylev treifa? If treifa considered alive, so when it died, it became an avela. How an avela? Amura, Trey says that. And im treifa, he told me that it's already a dead animal walking, so it's even worse than an avela. So what's the point of the Torah to say chaylev treifa? How do you become an avela? Ella must be according to Yehuda's way of learning approach. Lahavi treifa sheshachta. They're talking about a treifa animal, the kosher species, but that turned out to be treif. Shechel batar, that its fat is tar, and then as if to infer, but the meat is still tameh. If you shechted the animal to be treif, the meat is still tummy. Miklal the himetama, how can it be? Well, Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Rabbi Yehuda Marav, I'm the other same. It says in the pasuk, the chiyamus, if will die from mina behema, from the behema, and so on and so forth. You touch it, you become tummy. What do you mean min ha-behema? Chiyam is behema. Min ha-behema sounds like from some of the animals. Mixes behema tama. Some animals generate tumah, and mixes behema ain't tama. Some animals don't. What do you mean? The eidazu, which ones don't? Treifa sheshachta. If you shechted an animal, it turned out to be treif, it's no longer tumah. So how is Rabbi Yehuda going to learn the chayla? Rabbi Yehuda says there's a big deal out of the word treifa that's extra by a bird. How is he going to explain it when it comes to fats? So Gemara says, that's not a question. We're going to use the word treif by fats to teach you another halacha, unrelated, and therefore I can still use the treifa by bird to teach you if you shechted it. It's not, if you shechted by bird, it still generates tumah. What are you going to learn by an animal? El treifa maboile, you know why you need treifa here? Lemuute tmeya. In other words, how do we know which animals the fats do not generate tumah? In the pasuk, it doesn't say we're talking about the kosher species, non-kosher species. It doesn't say. It just says in the pasuk, chayla levela chayla treifa. You know that the yazachol malacha does not generate tumah. Maybe it's talking about not kosher animals. How do we know talking about kosher animals only? You know how we know? From the word treifa. Only those animals with treifa is an issue. But animals with treifa is not an issue. For example, a non-kosher animal, we're not talking about that. Of course, the chaylev is metame. So that's what I need the word treifa by animal. Says the Gemara, you know, I need the word treifa to come and exclude a non-kosher animal. And we learn as follows. Those animals with treifa is an issue that, you know, if it's treifa, it's a problem. If it's not treifa, it's all right. Then we say that the chaylev is permitted. The exception is, there's no treifa. In those species where treifa makes no difference, the chaylev always remains tummy. So the Gemara, if that's shot by animal, maybe that's a shot here by a bird as well. Say, how do you know by a bird it's talking about a kosher bird? All the pasuk says is that if you ate it, you know, you become tummy. You know, when you eat it, you become tummy. You got to watch your clothes. How do you know talking about a kosher bird? Maybe talking about a non-kosher bird. How do we know? So we'll say the same thing. The word treifa by a bird is to tell you that only those birds with treifa is an issue. So whatever you learn by chaylut by animal, use it by bird, and no longer treifa is extra to teach Rabbi Yehuda's din that if you shechted it, it doesn't have tumah. Ask the Gemara. No hachanami, say the same thing here. Lamute oif tamei, to tell you that this din of becoming tummy does not apply to a non-kosher bird. She'ein b'min a treifa, because over there treifa means nothing. Says the Gemara, no. By a bird to teach us that din that is talking about a kosher bird, Rabbi Yehuda learns from elsewhere. He doesn't need the pasuk here. Where does he learn from? So he wants to oif tamei le Rabbi Yehuda menevel nafla. He learns from the pasuk, but not from the word treifa, from the word nevela. So therefore, I'll see him in how he learns that. So from the word nevela, the same thing. When do we say that the bird, if you ate it, and you ate it, it becomes tummy? Only where nevela is a difference. No, if it wouldn't have been nevela, you could have eaten it. Now there's nevela, you can't. But a non-kosher bird, it makes no difference what you did with it. You can never eat it. Whether it's nevela or the shechted, it makes no difference. So that's how we know it's talking about a kosher bird. So Rabbi Yehuda says, how do I know what I do with the word treifa by a bird? To teach you if you shechted, it's still tummy. But when it comes to an animal, I need the word treifa there to tell you it's talking about kosher animals, what treifa matters. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda says, I would have thought that a nevela of an oif should be metame begodim, that even a non-kosher bird, when you swallow, you become tummy. That says nevela, and we're going to focus on the word nevela. That what, though only those birds, that the problem is that it's a nevela. That's why you can't eat it. But where the nevela is not the problem, even if it wouldn't have been nevela, they couldn't eat it, it's not included in this pasuk. Because you're not allowed because it's not kosher bird, it's not included in this pasuk, and therefore there's no tumah there. Says the Gemara nu. So the same thing. So if you're telling me that for the word nevela by a bird, we know it's talking about kosher, well, we have by this case of fats, the Torah says the chaylev nevela, the chaylev treifa. So say the same thing. You told me that the chaylev treifa, I needed to tell me that it's talking about a kosher animal. You can learn from the word chaylev nevela. Only those animals with nevela is an issue. A non-kosher animal, there's not an issue. So I already know about animals, and what do I do with the word treifa? So the Gemara is Hainami Tefuk Lei. That also said by your animal. The Chaylev Nevela. Mishi Sudim Shabbatech Chaylev Nevela. Only those that are forbidden because it says in Torah you shouldn't eat a nevela. Yatzazu Sheidim Shabbatech Nevela. But if it comes a non-kosher animal, the nevela is not the issue. is not included in the pasuk, the fats still generate tumah. If it's tumah, that's a problem. So what are you going to do with the treifa by an animal? If you use your approach, then by an animal also we should say that if it's a kosher animal, you shechta to be treif, the animal should still generate tumah when we said before, the Yehuda Marav says that it doesn't. So you want Ella, high treifa, you know what we need treifa for? I'll tell you, by animal, something because by animal, there are two kinds of animals that are kosher. There's behemoth, but there's also chaya, like deer. Deer is kosher. I remember many years ago, the Sheikh Nekrinsky, he shechted, venison, he shechted deer, and everyone ran so excited to have kosher deer, and nobody knew how to cook it because it's treated totally different. You have to cook it very differently than an ordinary animal, cow or beef, and it was so tough, nobody ever was interested in buying it again. So there's two kinds of kosher animals, behemoth and chaya. So maybe a chaya also, the fat of the chaya, if the animal dies or whatever it is, the fat should be of a chaya also should be mutter. Should be mutter, and therefore we need the word treifa as follows. Elahai treifa, but you know what we need the word treifa? La suye chaya, to come include to add a chaya. So the Gemara, what do you mean? Salchan, I would have thought, Misha Chelba, I would have thought, Misha Chelba also, I would have thought, you know which fats does not generate tumah? Only by behemoth. Why? Because by behemoth, the meat is permitted, the fats is forbidden, and the pasuk says, you shouldn't eat the fats. They're talking about the fats you cannot eat, the flesh you could eat, and therefore if the animal dies, the fats is permitted. Okay. But when it comes to a chaya, while the animal is alive, you're allowed to eat the fats as well. So therefore, you're allowed of a chaya, you're allowed to eat the fats of a chaya. That's what the Torah says. So therefore, we would have said that over there, it's not included in this pasuk, and therefore the fat of a chaya should generate tumah, and it's not included in this pasuk. That's how I would have thought that the fat should be awesome. I was like this. Saga, I would have thought, that were those animals where the fat is forbidden, the flesh is permitted. And then we say that if it dies, the fat is does not generate tumah. Yotzazu, the exception will be a chayesh, shechelba ubisramuta. You're allowed to eat the fats as well as in the meat. Kamash v'lam. Therefore, it says treifa. And what do you want for the treifa? Any animal with treifa is an issue, the fats is permitted. And since by a chaya, by a deer, for example, or wild goats, the treifa is an issue. The treifa you can't eat it, but if it's not treifa, you could eat it. So they have a teacher that the fats of a chaya is also permitted. That's why I need the word treifa by animals. He said to him, I don't understand. Why is it that a non-kosher animal, the fat does not become permitted as far as tumah is concerned once it dies? Because the ain chelba cholog b'bisra. Because over there, the status of the fat and the status of the meat is the same when alive regarding every respect. So therefore, since after the animal dies, the flesh is tameh, so too the fats is tameh. Just like you cannot eat the fats, you cannot eat the flesh. So too the tumah and the meat, the tumah is also in the fats. So it's not included in the pasuk that says that the fats are permitted. The chay is the same thing. Chayinami ain chelba cholog b'bisra. The fats of a chay has exact same status as the meat. Now, when if it's done kosher, you can eat the fats, you can eat the meat. So because it has the same status as the meat, it's not included in the pasuk which talks about that the fats are permitted. So the treifa there has no. You said we use the word treifa to tell you that the fats of a chaya does not generate tumah because treifa matters. No, we compare the fats of a chaya to the fats of a behemoth tameh, a non-kosher animal, which is that it does not lose its tumah when it dies like an avela. But furthermore, it says the pasuk, "But there's a fat that you're generally not allowed to eat, and by a chaya you're allowed to eat the fats." So the question goes back: what does Rabbi Yehuda do with the word treifa by an animal? So we'll just finish with Abaya, and then tomorrow you'll continue on with Rava. Elo Abaya. Abaya says, treifa. You know what we do with treifa by an animal? Nothing to do with a bird. You know what we do with treifa by an animal? Legufe yitzach. We need it for itself. What do you mean for itself? To tell you that not only the chaylev of an avela, the animal, an avela is permitted, or also the chaylev of a treifa is also not permitted to mean that there's no tumah anymore. Now, l'chayda, we said before that if the treifa died by itself, not talking about shchita, died by itself, it is an avela. So why should it, just because it's treifa as well, why should it be any different? I would have thought no. I would have thought as follows. I would have thought, just like I would have thought that we would compare a treifa to a non-kosher animal. A kosher animal, as long as it was alive, there was cheskas kashas, right? Then but a non-kosher animal was never kosher. A treifa animal also was never kosher. And since a treifa animal is never kosher, it's similar to a non-kosher animal. And therefore, I would have said that the fat of a treifa does not lose its tumah, even though it died. It's not included in the vela because it's different than the vela. The vela was kosher until it died by itself. If any, it always had the potential to be shot and slaughtered to be good. But a treifa, it was not kosher from when the moment it became treif. So therefore, it's similar to a non-kosher animal. That's a thought, and therefore the chaylev does not become permitted, does not lose its tumah, just like a non-kosher animal doesn't. That's why I would have thought. Therefore, the Torah has to say nevela, chaylev, nevela, and chaylev treif. Tell you no, that even though it's treif, the chaylev still loses its tumah. I would have thought hoyel tmei asur b'chaim a atomic animal is asur while it's alive. Today for asur b'chaim he was alive is asur. So mat tmei chel b'tamei by a non-kosher animal the chaylev is tamei. Af treifa chel b'tamei by a treifa also the fat should be tamei. That's what we would have thought. That's why I need a pasuk chel treifa. That's what I'm using for. So I want to ask a question, two questions. So by a bird, so the same approach that you have by an animal. Let's go back to a bird. You said that the word treifa is extra there, and therefore must be talking about that you shechted it, and it turned out to be treifa, and it's still tummy. How do you know? Maybe it's coming to tell you that a kosher bird, not only in the veil if it died on its own, but if it died on its own and it was treif, even so, it becomes tummy when you ate it, because you would have thought that it's similar to a non-kosher bird, because it was usher even before it died. Same thing. You use there's no longer extra the word treifa there. So you shouldn't say a non-kosher bird you're not allowed to eat. The treifa and this treifa, even though it's a kosher bird, but it's a treifa, you could never eat it. Just like a non-kosher bird is not matame if you swallow it. Af treifa ain't a matame. So too a kosher bird that's treif shouldn't be matame. So the pasuk has to say the veil of a treifa by a bird to tell you that even though it was treif, it's still matame. If you use that approach. And if you don't believe that, then we go back to animal. What do you do with treifa? Number one. Number two, how could you even think to compare a kosher bird or kosher animal that's treif to a non-kosher animal? How can you think so? A non-kosher animal wasn't from the moment it was born, it was not kosher. Treifa, it somehow or another contracted something treif later on. But initially it was kosher. So how do you compare the two? You can tell me, no, we're talking about a case of a treifa that was born with a treifa, with this defect. Treifa mebeten ma'ikalim. We're talking about a treifa that was born with a treifa. So we would have thought, if it was never a moment that was kosher, maybe it should be similar to a non-kosher animal. And just like over there, the fats are still tummy after it dies, so too by this kosher animal that was born treif, should also generate tumah. That's why the pasuk has a treifa. That's what it thinks. It can't be because the mina mi'ika. But the fact is, at least that species is generally kosher. So it goes back to the question, and we'll stop here. It goes back to the question: how does Rabbi Yehuda know to say that if he shechted the bird, it's still tummy? And he says because the word treifa is extra, so it must be talking about you actually shechted it. So what are you going to do with the pasuk by fats chayla the veil? It says treifa there as well. What does treifa come tell you? Can't be that if you shechted them, that the chayla becomes permitted. Because if then you have to infer, but the meat stays tummy, and we learned that if you shecht an animal, even though it turned out to be treif, there's no tumah anymore. So we're trying to understand where does Rabbi Yehuda learn that by a bird, if you shechted it and turned out to be treif, it still generates tumah, and by an animal it says treifa there, we don't make a distinction. What's the treifa to do with that? What do you do with treifa by an animal? Anyway, a bit difficult to